Talal Alsaleem is an award-winning marriage counselor. He is an infidelity recovery specialist and works exclusively with couples who are dealing with the impact of physical and emotional affairs. He developed a solution-focused method of infidelity counseling that has helped hundreds of couples navigate the challenges of the healing journey from affairs. He is the author of the acclaimed book, Infidelity, the best worst thing that could happen to you. The best worst thing that could happen to your marriage, excuse me. And the author of the relationship column, Heart Matters. Talal is an active member of the Continuing Education Provider Approval Committee and the president of the Sacramento Valley of RECAMFT. Please welcome me, or join me in welcoming Talal. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. How you all doing today? Happy Friday, and thank you so much for having me over. It's such a great honor and privilege for me to be here today. And I just want to really compliment you guys on the amazing chapter that you have. You have an amazing board and amazing volunteers. So I was talking to Doreen about this. So give your board and volunteers a hand. They do a good job. So before I start the presentation, I have a couple of questions for you guys. The first one is, how many of you in this room or somebody that you know have been impacted directly or indirectly by infidelity? A show of hands. Wow. So almost everyone in the room. So second question, how many of you ever recall taking a graduate level class to prepare you to how to deal with infidelity counseling? 0 hands. Okay. Does it bother you that as a group of professionals we're so ill-prepared to deal with such a prevalent issue? It bothers me as well, and this was one of the main reasons why I dedicated a big portion of my career to researching the causes of infidelity as well as the best way to treat it. So in today's presentation is going to be broken down into 2 segments. And the first one, I'm going to share with you my findings, as well as my thoughts about the current literature on infidelity counseling and infidelity theory based on empirical studies, which was the focus of my doctoral dissertation research. On the second segment, I'm going to share with you some of the clinical interventions as well as the clinical milestones that I have developed based on my extensive work with clients dealing with infidelity. But please keep in mind, we could spend a whole semester or a whole year talking about infidelity without doing justice. So my hope for you today is to walk away with a broader understanding of infidelity as a clinical construct, as well as some of the basic principles that you need to know about to do successful infidelity counseling in your practice. So before I do that, I'm going to show you a little clip to highlight the necessity of infidelity counseling. You will see me in this clip working with a couple who are describing a milestone I call acknowledging the impact of affair. And keep in mind while you're watching this, they're describing an infidelity incident that happened 4 years ago.
So now we understand what happened and why it happened, right? So the next step in this process is the impact of this affair on the relationship. So I want you to tell me, how do you think this impacted him? Emotionally, physically, spiritually, in any aspect of his life?
I think it destroyed him, like, as a person, and it just, like, even his mental, like thinking, I think it really, like, ruined him. I feel like I damaged him really bad, like, you know.
In what way?
Like, I feel like, because he's so emotional, and, like, he's very, soft-hearted and caring and stuff, and I felt like I really, first of all, he felt disrespected because his wife cheated on him, and he felt like he can never trust someone ever again, maybe never can love anybody ever like this again, and I feel like I lost a lot of respect for him, and what else to tell you? Like, everything. I think, like, because he was so damaged, like, he stopped focusing on everything else. Like, he even let his work go, and he started drinking more, and he just started smoking and just didn't care about anything.
What did this do to how he sees himself and how he sees you, how he sees the world?
I guess he felt like he was worthless. He wasn't responsible enough to, you know, like take charge of his marriage and of his life, and like it felt like he just felt like he was a failure in everything. Yeah.
How do you think it changed how he sees the relationship with you?
Oh yeah, he has a hard time trusting me. Every second he would remind me what I did, and no matter what I did, he would watch me. You know, like I felt like you know, like I was always watched, and I always wanted to be just, you know, too scared to make any mistakes. And sometimes I just tried so hard that it backfires all the time on me, because I just wanted to go smooth, and the next thing you know, it's something else. And yeah.
Okay. You heard what she said. Is she missing anything from how this impacted you?
She really killed myself. She really killed me inside. The thoughts that I had towards myself. She damaged me. She made me suicidal. I never had those thoughts ever in my life. I hated the person I was becoming. I was on, just the life machine, just the brain not working, just functioning. Like a bad dream. But I'm living through it.
How did this change you?
The good or the bad?
Both, I guess, if there is any good.
The bad, it made me hate myself, hate the world. Just hated us. I was the only good thing was I was more independent. That I can live without her.
And why is that a good thing?
Because I still always rely on her.
Exactly. So, experiencing this pain and this hurt makes it easier for you to disconnect and say, I don't need you in my life.
Yeah.
Did you miss anything else from how this impacted you? Anything else that you wanted to know as far as how this hurt you? How did it change you? Change how you see the world? Change how you see her?
I changed, it just like, how it changed me is, in a bad way, it's like, say my sister-in-law was going with her friends, and I asked my brother, was she really going with her friends? Like, I would see other females that are close to me, like my family members, going out and whatnot, bring on their phones. I'm like, is she really texting somebody else? Like, I'll put my perspective on that.
So in a way now you don't trust people in general
Yeah.
because of this.
Any thoughts in reaction to this video?
Couldn't really hear all of it, but what I could hear, I was aware that the husband was in victim mode, which in a sense was a way of walling off. That was just one impression.
Okay. Thank you. And you know, and again, the trauma of infidelity does put people in those positions.
I also was interested in when you were meeting with them, how you were asking her the questions first about what he might be feeling and what he might think is going on versus going to him first. And I thought that that was kind of opening up a whole nother avenue for him and her to be able to begin in that space.
Sure. What do you think would be the significance of starting with the unfaithful partner versus the betrayed partner?
I think it would give them an opportunity to focus not from guilt, like, I did this wrong, and start with their own story, but to really give focus to what might be going on in the moment and how he is feeling right now, so that it's giving him a sense of being seen as well.
Beautiful. That's to me that's the highlight of it, is that the betrayed partner need to know that the unfaithful understand the impact of what happened on the relationship, because oftentimes there is this misassumption that the unfaithful have no clue about the harm they have caused to the relationship. Mm-hmm. And it's important to hear it from them directly and give the betrayed the opportunity to elaborate on what else was missed. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for that comment.
Sure.
All right, so for me, this highlights the global impact of infidelity. So not only it changed how he sees the relationship, it changed his worldview, right? When he sees other people engage in activities that he feels suspicious, he questions their motives. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the history of the phenomena of infidelity. My undergraduate training was in anthropology, so I always appreciated looking at human behavior from a global cultural perspective. Infidelity has been in existence since the beginning of recorded human history and possibly earlier. It is a cross-cultural, prevalent human behavior. You see it in every culture. And because of the devastating impact that it has on the dyads and the social units throughout history, society always tried to come up with ways to prevent it from happening. So first, I want to kind of show you a little bit about how infidelity was seen from the early civilization lens, just to kind of see that timeline. So, dating back to 1772 BC, the earliest code of laws that we know about in ancient Mesopotamia, the Code of Hammurabi. In that code... Sure. Better? Okay. So, the Code of Hammurabi actually has a specific punishment for adultery, which is drowning. And that's the earliest code of recorded law that we know of. In ancient civilization, in India and Egypt and Rome and Greece, they practiced rhinotomy, which is the amputation of the nose, as a punishment for infidelity. And the idea behind this was to mark the unfaithful partner, as well as in the hope of deterring.
Was that for both male and female?
Excellent question. Throughout history, you'll see there is a definite gender, sex bias. So it depends on which society. There are times where the laws were more punitive toward women. Predominantly, I would say they were unfair to women than it is to men, but not all cultures.
What about the women or men?
Both. Yeah. So we also have in Native American cultures the practice of bodily mutilation as a punishment to adulterous wife. So here the emphasis was more toward the female than the male to prevent future infraction. And also among the Aztecs, wife caught in adultery were occasionally impaled or stoned to death, which is pretty gruesome. Now if we take it the religion lens, most Eastern and Western religion have negative views on infidelity and adultery, starting with the Hebrew Bible. looking at the seventh commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. And actually in Leviticus, there is capital punishment prescribed as punishment for adultery. Under Muslim law, adultery is considered to be a violation of the marital contract, and punishment varies. It could be lashing, it could be stoning to death, it could be honor killing, depends on which region you are in the world and how the law is interpreted. And in the Hindu texts, there is a wide range of views on adultery, but some texts view adultery as a sin, just like murder, incest, or bad deeds. And even when you look at the Buddhist text, adultery is often described as a form of sexual wrongdoing and usually originate from greed in past life. Now let's take a look at the modern law lens and how modern society have tried to deal with infidelity. So looking at Asia, adultery is still considered to be a crime in Taiwan and the Philippines. It was a crime in Japan until 1947, and is currently not considered to be a crime in China, but it is ground for divorce. If you look at Europe, adultery is no longer a crime in any European country, and I believe the last country to change their laws was Austria in 1997. Latin America, until the mid-1990s, most Latin American countries had laws against adultery. Adultery has been decriminalized in most of these countries as of the present day. In Australia, adultery is not considered a crime, and this is due to a federal act in which the Australian government felt sexual interaction between consenting adults is their business, and the government should not get involved. Now, if we take a look at the United States, we're going to find something interesting here. As of 2018, adultery considered to be a criminal offense in almost 20 states. But prosecutions are rare, but the laws still consider it to be a crime. Even though most of these laws are found in conservative states, especially the southern states, there are some notable exceptions, such as the case of New York, which I found surprising. So adultery is considered to be a felony crime in Idaho, Oklahoma, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and is considered to be a misdemeanor in New York and Utah. And penalties varies. It could be as low as a $10 fine, and all the way to 4 years in prison in Michigan. So, are you guys surprised by this? Okay. So who wants to try an explanation as far as why is this different in the United States?
I'll say white male misogyny.
Well, that's one interpretation. What else? Come on, guys, don't be shy. Why do you think we have a unique situation here in the United States?
Because each state has its own laws, and I'll say it, religion. I think that there's,
Okay.
like the Bible Belt, which is where I grew up, Oklahoma, and I think that's a big factor.
Thank you. So that's actually one of the most common interpretation to explaining this, which is the unique political system in the United States and the separation between church and state, as well as the diversity of different religious views and how that impact the lobbying efforts on the laws that stays on the books. So this is the current map of the United States. The states in blue are the ones who still have laws against adultery. Okay, so now I'm going to talk to you about some of the challenges that I encountered in the literature about infidelity counseling and infidelity theory. And I like to categorize these challenges in what prevent us as clinicians and researchers to conceptualize infidelity as a clinical construct. So the first one is the lack of an operational definition. Now, operational definitions, for those of you who don't know what that is, it is the way we define a variable in research, right? If we're going to describe a phenomenon, we need to have some common definition for it, so that when you're doing research, you have consistent language to communicate about those variables so that we can actually replicate the findings. So, in the literature on infidelity, there is no agreed upon definition for infidelity. But also, there are not an agreed upon language and terminology to describe infidelity. Infidelity is just one of many terms. You know, you have people who call it cheating or extradietic behavior or unfaithfulness or adultery. In addition to this, study shows that there is a huge variation between how researchers conceptualize and define infidelity in comparison to the average person. So researchers tend to define infidelity in very specific targeted behavior, versus the average person have more of a global patterns of behaviors of betrayal when they define infidelity. Also, the language used by researchers tend to be neutral, such as extradietic behavior, versus the average person, they use terms like cheating, adultery. It has that moral connotation to it. So, why is this a problem? Why do we need an agreed upon definition for infidelity? Why is this important? Okay. Yeah.
Well, just so we are on the same page on what to treat and have, have the same basic idea about what we are talking about. I mean, in this setting at least.
Sure, consistency, right? Okay. Someone in the back.
I think also to have clarity, to get out of the place of judgment and to be clear on that this is about a contract that had been agreed upon by two people. So I think to get out of the judgment part and into the clarity about the contract and the feelings behind that. And
Okay, so you're saying it would be helpful to intellectualize infidelity rather than just being stuck with the emotional reaction to it. Okay, excellent. So the fact that we don't have agreed upon operational definition of infidelity has two main impacts. One, from a research perspective, the prevalence rates of infidelity in the literature varies. It could be as low as 1.2% to 85.5%. So we don't even know how bad of infidelity is, because depending on who's doing the research and the operational definition they're using, it skews the data. So that's one of the most basic things that we need to know about it, its prevalence. So now imagine all the other findings in research and our ability to actually to replicate those to general settings. Now, from the clinical standpoint, why do people come to counseling? When you have a couple, why do they come to you?
They want to stay together if they can.
Okay.
They want to stay together if they can.
Okay. So, which means that they also are bringing some issues to fix, right? So, which means that for the dyad, they need to have an agreed upon definition of what the problem is, right? Because if they have two different ideas of what the problem is, and that idea is different than yours, then you can't even begin to establish the treatment plan, right? Because also study shows that even couples counselors, when you present them with vignettes describing different varieties and ranges of inappropriate sexual and emotional behavior, they can agree to what constitutes sexual infidelity, emotional infidelity. So not only the members of the dyad need to have the same definition, but also that has to match with your definition as the clinician, because you're the therapeutic alliance. Does that make sense? So let me show you a video that highlights the significance of definition in clinical practice. And in this clip, you're going to see the unfaithful partner trying to define how she sees the infidelity behavior that happened in this relationship.
Is because life is a lot better when you share your life with somebody else. We all have physical and emotional needs, and when we commit to a relationship, right, it's like a contract, saying that I choose so-and-so to be the one who's fulfilling my physical and emotional needs, right? The moment I try to outsource that job to somebody else, whether it's for emotional or physical, it breached the contract, right?
Right.
To me, that falls into the line of infidelity.
Mhm.
So, considering the circumstances that the two of you have experienced, forget that the timeline is slightly different. Do you believe that definition fit, Clarissa, in terms of what took place between you and Jason and Eugene?
It's really hard for me because if Jason and I were steady and not always breaking up, making up so many times, I would say it was cheating and it's definitely infidelity. But because it was cheating, it was, because everything wasn't, I didn't finally close the door. I should have closed the door completely, and it was cheating, it was infidelity.
Okay. So, fair enough, because really, despite the fact that you guys were on and off, right, you were aware that there was, you're giving Jason the impression that things were actually working with him, right, even though it was chaotic. And I think that ties into why there was efforts to hide and lie, right? Because if you know that what you're doing was appropriate, you wouldn't have lied to him. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. So in that case, would you say, the type of infidelity that you were engaged in, was it emotional infidelity? Was it physical infidelity? Was it a combination of both?
It was emotional. Jason thinks it was emotional. I didn't have sex with him. Jason says I did because he said he heard me. But we didn't have intercourse, but we had forms of sex. So it was more emotional than anything.
Okay, so there was some forms of sex, but it wasn't actual intercourse, and that's how you define physical infidelity.
Yeah.
How do you think he reacted? Huh? Yeah. So, and somebody had a comment or question? Oh, God.
I can't help but notice how disengaged and how detached both of the people who were cheated was, just by their physical demeanor. Both of them are turned away, their heads are turned, it's kind of a body slump. There's just no energy toward the partner. And I wonder if that's significant other than the fact that it's really disengaged.
Yeah, it's an excellent observation, right? And to me, that symbolizes what happens to the intimacy in the relationship. One thing to keep in mind in both those couples and those clips, the infidelity happened 3 or 4 years ago, and they're just now trying to deal with it. Now, if you're seeing somebody who's dealing with infidelity in the moment, the body language will change. But you are 100% correct in terms of this is a common pattern, right? That disengagement, right? Any other questions or concerns?
For him, I'm thinking that his definition about infidelity is probably different, that any kind of affection that she shared with this other person would feel like infidelity to him, even though she's defining it as intercourse only.
Excellent point.
I may have missed it, but you said the infidelity happened 3 or 4 years ago. But is this the first session, or where does it fall in your meeting with them?
So this is actually first session. Yeah. Okay. So another important part of this here too is that anybody in his position is going to assume that she is trying to minimize what happened. That would be the natural assumption. You're trying to say that this one is not a sexual affair, even though there was some sexual act. But sometimes people actually conceptualize sexual infidelity different than their partner. It may not seem to be the most popular way of defining it. That's how she made sense of it in her mind, right? And again, that could be like the first obstacle in terms of establishing the therapeutic alliance, because if they can't even agree on what kind of problem we're trying to fix, then you can't really move forward. So the other challenge I encountered in the literature is that there are so many individual and group variation about how infidelity manifests. So everything that we need to know about infidelity, about what causes it, how does it affect people, how prevalent it is, how do people respond to it, varied from a person to person, dyad to dyad, group to group, which I think this is one of the main reasons that we have not been able to find a unifying theory to understand the etiology of infidelity, as well as we haven't been able to come up with a general framework of treatment that works for all these different variations. So I'm going to share with you some of the major differences in the manifestation of infidelity. One of them is the sex differences between males and females. There is differences in prevalence rate. Some studies shows that prevalence rates are higher in males than they are in females. We're talking about 79%. Other studies shows that prevalent rate of infidelity in females are significantly higher than males, 31 to 24%. And some studies shows, yes, there are differences between males and females, but only under the age of 40. After the age of 40, the prevalence rates become similar. So, and I think a big part of this also has to do with how males and females conceptualize infidelity, and also we have that previous problem of a lack of an operational definition. There's differences in how males and females conceptualize infidelity and their attitudes about it. Females tend to list a wide range of non-sexual behavior when they think about infidelity and they try to define it, while males are more focused on the sexual behavior. Also, when males and females presented with vignettes about a hypothetical scenarios on whether or not they would be would they be willing to engage in infidelity behavior, males tend to be more accepting of that and most often say, yes, I will be more likely to engage that in comparison to females. There is differences in reaction to infidelity. There was a study that was done in 2014 in which they found males tend to be more upset about the discovery of a sexual affair, while females tend to be more upset about the discovery of emotional affair. Can anybody guess why?
I was just thinking about how women really need to feel loved when they're having sex.
Okay.
And so I don't remember exactly your question, but I think it has to do with that, and men don't need to feel that as much.
Okay, so in terms of what males and females value more about the intimacy, right, whether it's the physical or the emotional aspect of it. So I'll tell you the evolutionary biology perspective. So from evolutionary biology perspective, the idea here is that males and females face different reproductive pressures because we have different biologies. Meaning that because of the differences in our reproductive biology, we favor different mating strategies. So for the females, there is a longer gestation period. For the males, they have increased opportunities to pass their DNA in the gene pool without having to worry about the long gestation period. So females tend to favor mating strategies that look for stability, long-term relationships, or male reproductive strategy favors multiple encounters. And the goal here is to increase the chances of passing your DNA in the gene pool. Now, the evolutionary biology perspective might have face value validity if we assume that all relationships are heterosexual, and in all relationships, the purpose of sex is procreation. That's not the case. So for me, the evolutionary biology falls short because, we live in a different world where this idea is not applicable. I like an idea that was proposed in the mid-90s. It's called the double shot hypothesis. And they explain this way. Males would be more upset about sexual affairs because from the male perspective, he would think that his female partner would not have sex with someone unless she is emotionally attached to him. So the sexual affair becomes a 2-for-1. It becomes a signifier of both lines being crossed, and that's why it's more upsetting for the males to discover sexual affairs, because he assumed both lines were crossed. On the other hand, females have the assumption that if their male partner had sex with, or if their male partner was emotionally attached to another female, he would not get emotionally attached to her unless he actually did have sex with her. So the emotional affair becomes, again, a signifier of crossing both lines. What do you guys think about this idea? Logical? Okay. You want to elaborate?
Well, hang on a sec.
Yeah. I'm going to keep you running today, sorry.
You just are, they just are making a lot of assumptions,
Yeah.
you know, and they may not always be true.
Yeah. And that's another, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to also say, since the mic is right here, when you were talking about the biological reasons, and you were saying, well, it's a different day and age now, and so maybe it's not so applicable, what just came to my mind was that the unconscious drives, are so powerful and strong, and what about that? Because even though we might be conscious in a different way, the ways that we're, moved by our biology are mysterious and much more unconscious, I think, than we're aware.
Sure. For me, this always kind of highlight the issues I had with all kind of studies, because oftentimes it's like there's such a gap between our spiritual, cultural evolution or biological evolution. We cannot always say we have to stick to the rigid framework of biology. Right? Not only that, but also even our social constructs about what we know about sex and males and females is changing. It's evolving. Right? So we have even a more fluid understanding of sexuality, and I think hopefully we'll see a trend of that in research, right? Because we don't want to be stuck with just kind of archaic ways of looking at this.
I'm wondering about the countries that have passed laws about infidelity and whether or not there's a consistent definition of what infidelity is within those laws.
And that's actually a very good question. Again, when you're dealing with laws, whether it's modern laws or ancient laws, usually there are some kind of description because you need to come up with an equal measures. So there's usually some form of agreed upon definition and a process to prove whether or not somebody was engaged in infidelity. Even if you go with a religious approach, some religion where they require a specific number of witnesses, a specific kind of witnesses who actually might have saw this behavior before they actually apply the law.
Would that be physical infidelity or an emotional infidelity or both?
Sure. So the common ones that's emphasis in the law is the sexual infidelity because it's easier to prove than emotional infidelity. Does that make sense?
Okay, so we're talking about infidelity. What about the definition of fidelity? To know when something is an infidelity.
Sure.
What about fidelity? To know.
Yeah. What does it mean to have fidelity in the relationship, right?
Right.
And again, and as even looking at it from the law perspective, each society law reflect what's going on internally with that society. And then this goes to explaining the variation where, like in Roman times, right? If it's okay to have sexual encounters with somebody that you own, right? As long as they're not a free person. This is back in ancient days, right? So it's interesting how these relationships kind of affect people's perspective. I think it's very fluid to whatever societal processes were impacting that culture. And I think oftentimes it created that inequality and disparity in power, right? But for me, I do like the idea of really focusing on what does fidelity mean, right? What does it mean to be committed to a relationship? Excellent. Okay, so socioeconomic status has also been a source of variation in terms of infidelity. The literature have mixed findings about the correlation between income, education, and infidelity. Some studies shows that infidelity is more common with people who are highly educated or have more money. Other studies shows the opposite. There was a study that was done in 2016 about the Ashley Madison website, and for those of you who don't know about that website, it's a website designed for people who actually want to pursue affairs. There was a big data breach in 2016 where it allowed researchers a unique opportunity to analyze a large set of data. They got access to data for 700,000 individuals. Data about their income, education level, religion, so on and so forth. So in that analysis, they found that couples with children and single earning males are more likely to engage in infidelity in comparison to couples with similar income. Can anybody guess why?
Woman more dependent on her partner, less likely to be able to break out of the relationship if he's unfaithful.
Excellent. So this is along the line of power disparity in the relationship. Very good point. So the similarity of income was seen as an indication of compatibility and equality in the relationship, which have been seen as a protective factor against infidelity. So the idea behind it here too is that couples who are making the same income, they probably are more compatible because they have the same earning power, which is the assumption that they have mutual intellectual abilities and mutual accomplishment, which again transfer into equality in the relationship. I like looking at the role of education as how it affects the partner intellectual compatibility, earning contribution, and views about sexuality, because I've seen how that can create a gap between a couple and a dyad and might lead to a dissatisfaction in the relationship. Occupation has also been a factor. In that same study, they found that there is a high number of military personnel who are on this website in comparison to any other job. And the reason behind that is the occupational stressor of being in the military and the stress it puts on individuals through trauma that you experience in the field, as well as the stress that puts on relationship, the frequent travel, the frequent relocation. It's not really conducive for establishing and maintaining strong, healthy attachment. In my practice, I see a common trend of, I see a lot of law enforcement officers and nurses. And part of that has to do with the long hours, the graveyard shift. Again, they also deal with trauma in their professional line of duty. But also, we all heard about this idea of a work spouse, right? A work husband or a work wife. And I think sometimes if you're in an occupation where there is blurred boundaries, or occupation where the work culture encourages those blurred boundaries, you're more likely to find yourself engaged in those infidelity behavior, because even with the law enforcement, there is a real partnership, right? You're partner with somebody, and if both of you are unhappy in your relationship and you have this in common, you spend more time with your work partner than your spouse, it's easier to blur those lines and act on these desires. So place of residence was also an interesting find. Where people live contribute to the likelihood of engaging in infidelity. The way this works has to do with the demographic distribution. So if there is, I guess, a skewed ratio between available males and females in any kind of locale, that might increase as what they call alternative spousal partners, meaning you have more opportunities if there is less males than females in a specific geographical area, and you're a heterosexual male who's interested in having an affair, you would have increased access just because of the demographics. Another aspect of this too, people who live in larger city enjoy a high level of anonymity. If you're living in a small town, you're less likely to engage in infidelity behavior because everybody knows everyone. So in a way, where people live kind of determine the likelihood of engaging in those behaviors.
You just said men who are people who are interested in having affairs, but my sense is an awful lot of affairs happen. That they're not looking for something, but it's growing relationship and it becomes that. And then the other thing I've got a question for is, have you done any studying on open marriages, and what is it that is in those couples that is different?
Great questions. So stay tuned for the part about the cause, right, as far as the interest in infidelity versus it just happened. We'll explain that in more details. But also it's important to highlight that infidelity is not just happens in monogamous relationship, it happens also in consensual non-monogamy. So I work with a lot of polyamorous couples or couples who are open marriages with multiple partners, and they still struggle with infidelity, right? And to me, that will take us to the need for having a flexible definition that works for all kinds of relationships. Because historically we have this assumption that the epitome of healthy relationship is monogamous relationship. Well, there are a lot of people who are engaged in consensual non-monogamous relationship, and they're very happy and content. So that's kind of, we're switching our view on this.
Back to the topic of geography. I was in San Diego for 20 years as a therapist, and there were a lot of people who moved to Paradise, but found that there was not a supportive community for marriage. So there was a lot of problems when people moved from other parts of the country into Paradise. I think it's true for California as a whole that there isn't the religious community, there isn't the tight-knit community that supports the traditions of marriage.
Okay.
And I think that makes a big difference.
That's also another important point to this, and this, I guess, would be more a cross-section with the culture of the demographics that you live in and that cultural belief and views about what are appropriate or inappropriate relationship. But a big part of being also in urban cities, bigger cities kind of tend to have more liberal attitude or maybe unconventional sexual values or norms, right? What you're highlighting too is that the communities that people live in to some extent influence the type of available relationship for them as well as their willingness to stick to those norms. So that's a very good point.